Cyprus. Fought over by successive powers throughout the ages, its position in the eastern Mediterranean made it a natural target. For the better part of 100 years, Cyprus was a British colony. Today, it's still a favorite destination for British tourists. But modern history has not been kind to Cyprus. In 1974, the island was torn apart by a Turkish invasion after a Greek-backed coup. After ferocious fighting, a ceasefire was declared. But the invasion left Cyprus a bitterly divided island. For almost 40 years, the United Nations has enforced a buffer zone between the Turkish north and the Greek south. It stretches from east to west across the island for more than 100 miles. It's constantly patrolled by UN personnel and is one of the longest-running peacekeeping missions in the world. Flying over the capital, Nicosia, the yawning divide is terribly obvious. The green, snaking strip of overgrown trees and derelict buildings cut right through the heart of the city. Unbelievable and unreal. Was there ever a more dramatic illustration of the division of a small island? We were one of the very few people to be allowed to film inside this no man's land since the fighting ended in August 1974. It's a place in which time has stopped. I went to see Nicosia's old international airport with Colonel Gerard Hughes of the UN.
My goodness.
Well, this is the check-in hall of the old terminal building. State-of-the-art in the 70s.
And this used to be the main, I
suppose?
suppose?
This would have the cafeteria, public conveniences, information and that sort of thing.
And you could imagine this being terribly crowded and...
Crowded. And this is where you would say goodbye to your relatives or whatever before they went upstairs to go through into departures.
This was once the main airport in Cyprus. Trapped in the buffer zone, it is now rotting and forlorn.
So this is the passport control.
So this is where there would have been a crowd of people waiting to board their planes.
Yes.
The pigeons have done quite a job here.
On the runway, evidence of the speed with which the fighting spread. This plane is still parked where it was hurriedly left in 1974. Leaving the airport and the buffer zone, we made our way into the normality of downtown Nicosia.
This is very, very odd because you are going through a busy city centre here, Nicosia, with people going about daily chores, their daily lives.
Actually, the man in the street here has no idea that this still exists, and I think it's one of the problems that we've had being so successful as far as the UN is concerned, keeping the two sides from escalating any sort of violence, that people just don't know that this still exists. And this doesn't only apply to the local people, it also applies to tourists as well, of course. I don't think that most tourists coming to Cyprus have any idea at all.
If they did know anything about it, the comparison tourists might be able to make is of driving down a busy London street and turning off to find an area closed off and guarded and pockmarked by gunfire. As we re-entered the buffer zone, it was difficult to imagine that this was once a place of bustling activity, not like the rest of the city.
And are these bullet marks on this building here?
Yes, this would have been a strong point for the National Guard, and you can see it's been subject to a lot of extremely heavy fire, both small arms, machine gun and rocket fire.
It gives you an idea of the intensity of the fighting at close quarters here.
Yes, and the fighting in the centre of the city was very intense.
There were numerous signs of the panic as the pulse of everyday life was stopped by the raging battle between the opposing armies. Homes and household items were abandoned as families fled in fear of their lives. Nothing escaped. This was once a garage of brand new cars. The owner got out. His cars didn't, and stayed to be rendered useless by rust and decay.
Are there civilian population still very close by?
Yes, this is the Ledra Street, which is the second biggest shopping street in Nicosia, and people can cross now from the south into the north, and this is the crossing point.
So this suddenly, all this this bit is suddenly lost, and now you are back into, well, what looks a little bit like modern civilization.
If you were to turn up here, you would be in normality.
Yes.
Indeed, the coffee shops and so on.
Paper shops and all that along there.
And if you down here, similarly, on the Turkish side, normality again.
And then after this fairly kind of normal thoroughfare, you look down there.
We move back into history, back into 1974.
That is extraordinary.
Back into our time warp.
That is bizarre.
Bizarre though it may be, the secret world of the buffer zone and the UN have kept the peace on this island for nearly 40 years.